I kick off, can I just go to James for an opening karakia, please?
Morena Max, morena koutou te whānau, e mihi ana ki a koutou. Karakia timatanga. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa paunamu te moana. Hei huarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia tātou katoa, hui e tai ki e. May the peace be widespread, may the seas be like greenstone, a pathway for us all this day, bind us all together. Āmini.
Āmini. Kia ora, thanks, James. Kia ora tātou, ko Max Baxter toko ingoa, ko mātua Otorohanga District Ahau. Hey, welcome everybody. What the funding? Look, we're here for the Youth Training and Employment work stream this morning, and we're here to discuss funding and all the different youth initiatives across the Waikato. Kia ora, my name's Max Baxter. I'm the Mayor of Otorohanga District. Along with all the other part-time things that I do in my day-to-day work, I also chair Mayor's Task Force for Jobs, which is all about getting youth into employment and training across all of our motu. So yeah, really engaged with what's happening in this kaupapa. So really pleased to have you here. I see there's a good number of people in the room. That's it from me at the moment. I will be chairing the meeting throughout this morning, but I'll pass over to different people at different times. We've got a wonderful group of presenters here this morning, but right now I'll pass over to Michelle. Now, Michelle is, Michelle Paki that is, who's Kānoa Regional Economic Development Unit of the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. I've known Michelle for a long time now. She's always inspirational, brings a wealth of experience to the youth training and employment space. And I'll hand over to you, Michelle. That was
apologies, Max. I think we're going to go to our extra Michelle Howie, project coordinator for the Waikato plan. To
My
give
apologies,
us a little bit of
people.
intro.
This is not the best start for me, so
We'll go to
Michelle as the morning goes on.
From MVIE after.
Okay, all cool. Michelle.
Oh, bye. Kia ora, Max. Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Michelle Howie tōku ingoa. Just a really quick intro for anybody who's new to joining us on an online hui like this. We have run a couple in the past. You'll see that we've started recording and transcriptions also. So anyone who's not able to join us today will be able to catch the recording, which we'll share. It's great to have so many people able to join in a format like this and get a taste of the YTE, the Youth Training and Employment Workstream under the Waikato Plan. For those that haven't had the joy of joining an online hui, we normally have a pretty active chat, so feel free to say hi in the chat. I see a few people have already done that. Share who you are, who you're representing, you know, what you're interested in hearing today perhaps, and let's also use the chat to capture any questions that you might have for our presenters. There might be a bit of time in between presenters. If you want to raise your hand and ask a question, we'll try and squeeze that in, but we'll try and keep the time quite tightly today. So a really quick heads up about the YTE workstream, a great space, something that quite a few of us here have been involved in for a few years. We're a collaborative space. We don't have a big organisation with resources behind this. It's an enabling space where a collective of the willing come together to talk about youth training and employment matters, bring the issues to the table, have big, open, robust discussions about that, something that a lot of us enjoy. So members are diverse and we're a pretty vertical organisation of collaborators. So we're pulling from, you know, young people themselves, youth providers in this space, funders, agencies and ministries operating in this space, philanthropics, community sectors, a really wide mix that keeps the conversations nice and open. We obviously are part of the Waikato Plan, and so the Leadership Committee and the Steering Group are a fantastic vehicle for supporting us with advocacy, connecting into central government when issues need to go further, and for us helping to drive that systems change that so many of us identify on a regular basis. We have a website, a new website, which is a fantastic place to read a bit more about us. I recommend that you go there. It's a way that you can also connect in. If you haven't found a way to be involved and you want to be involved, then you can find the email address there. Make yourself known to us. Lots of ways to get in touch. Join steering group, join a working group, just stay in touch with quarterly news that comes out through email as well. And on that website, you can read a few stories, taking a storytelling approach to sharing some of the project work that we've been privileged enough to enable over the last couple of years, different things we've done around the motu, around the Waikato, focused on young people, always with young people at the heart of what we're trying to do. Looking forward to talking about funding, what the funding, I think it's a great title. Props to Desiree for coming up with that. It's a hot topic and I know there's a lot of you here, so I won't take up any more time. Look forward to connecting in the breakout rooms with some of you a bit later. Kia ora. Michelle Pucky next.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Really appreciate that. I can see why we've got you on board and why you should be chairing this as opposed to myself. But hey, awesome. It's great to give the real good understanding to everyone about what the Waikato Plan YTE is about, so everybody can be on board. And it's great, I think, for everybody who is part of this hui this morning can get an understanding of the support that's out there for them. Look, hey, there's two other people I'd just like to introduce. One of them is Desiree Frisk, and she is a project manager for the Waikato Regional Council, and she is really the base behind all of this, the work that goes on behind the scenes. Great coordinator for what's happening around the place. So Desiree, thank you very much. And we do have someone new on board as well, and that's Melissa. She's our new Waikato Plan Administrator. So she's hiding behind the screens, probably typing furiously as we go, although I'd imagine she'll take the recording in afterwards to type up any relevant minutes that are necessary. So, hey, welcome, Melissa, to our space as well. Now, Desiree, please, at any point, or Michelle, if I get things wrong, please steer me back in the right direction again. But if I'm correct, we'll now go over to the first of our speakers or presenters, and that there is Michelle Pucky, who I've already given an introduction to a wee bit ahead of the time. But if I'm correct, I'll be handing over to Michelle now. Kia ora. Still looking for Michelle.
It looks like Michelle may not have logged in yet, so maybe she's held up a bit. Should we hop to presentation?
Yeah, two. So it's Melissa Gibson present? Yes, she is. I see her there. Awesome. So we'll move on to presenter two, and we'll come back to Michelle Pucky later. Melissa is the CEO or the Chief Executive Officer of the Len Reynolds Trust. Look, she's passionate about giving back to the community, loves challenging the status quo. So, look, let's just hand it over to Melissa and listen to what she has to say about the funding across the Waikato youth streams. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thanks. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, fine. Thank you.
Okay, cool. I've actually got a presentation, so do the whole how do I share my screen thing. Hang on. Yeah, I see the button.
Yeah, there's a little square box with the arrow at the top corner. You should be able to click that and off you go.
I think I got it. Did it work?
You're all set. We can see it.
Oh, okay, cool. System works. All right, so kia ora, I'm Melissa. I'm the CEO of the Len Reynolds Trust. I don't know that many of you here, I don't think. So hello to all the people I don't know. It's usually when I'm doing things in this space, it's all the same people. So it's good to see lots of new faces. I've only been doing this for just over 2 years. So I'm not like the oracle or anything like that. So bear with me with my ignorance and things that I may not know, and most of you probably know more than I do, so bear with. So a little bit about the trust. So we're a small family philanthropic trust, and the cool thing about that is that we get to do things however we want. We don't really have that much public accountability in terms of the way we operate. We're not answerable to the public or voters. Well, we are in a sense because we're a registered charity, but apart from that, we don't have anyone questioning what we do. So that gives us a real degree of flexibility in how we approach things. But the downside of that is that we don't actually have very much money to give away. So we only give away about $1.1 million a year. And as everyone knows, that's, you know, we could give that to one organisation and kind of call it a day type of thing. So we're limited in that respect. So a bit about us. Our vision is a Waikato where all children and young people are secure, resilient and thriving to ensure they meet their full potential. And we also have an environmental focus, so it's to protect and preserve the environment as a valuable taonga for future generations. So we're funding a lot of things in both where those spaces connect. So it's getting children and young people out into the environment so they're not separate. We don't see them as two separate things. So in terms of how we work, we used to be, so the trust has been around since the 1960s, but it was very much under the radar with Len and Ada, who set it up, basically giving to causes that they wanted to give to, very much under the radar. There was nothing public about it. They just chose, organisations close to their heart. But then when they passed away, they left the bulk of their assets to this trust, and it became so big that it needed to have some kind of formality around it. And originally when we set up, we had Community Waikato as our funding manager, and we did our funding in the very traditional way of, we had funding rounds, funding areas. People wrote lengthy applications, and then we had basically a scattergun approach to how our money went out into the world. But then I was appointed as CEO a couple of years ago, and then COVID happened. And as a result of that, we basically used that as a catalyst to look at the way we were operating and thought, why are we going through this really awful process where people have to come like cap in hand begging for money, and then we ask them to write this really long convoluted application, and then we might give them money or we might not give them money, but basically we're wasting everyone's time. So we stepped away from that, and we now don't do contestable funding. So also one of the things that kind of went along with that is when I first started in my role, I'd get these emails from people and it would be like, hi, when does your funding round open? Thanks. And I'd be like, this is so weird. Like, where's the joy? Where's the love? Where's the community spirit in this? And it felt really kind of like we were a bank and really like transactional. And I was like, I don't want to work in this job. Like, this is not nice. I don't want people to be like, hi, you've got the money, give me the money, thanks. I was like, this is not a very not nice way of operating for anyone. So we kind of took some of that stuff and moved away from that transactional, competitive, philanthropic space. And our model is now, we have a proactive model. So that means that we go out and look for charities that align with our criteria, and we basically approach people and say, hey, what are you doing? We'd love to hear more about it. And this is usually after we've done a bit of due diligence behind the scenes. So we review accounts, everything that we can find on charity services, websites and all of those things. And then we contact people that we think are doing awesome things. We also check out people's social media and word of mouth, those types of things, but also people do contact us as well, and then we go from there. So it's kind of like we're open to hearing from people, but we also proactively go out and seek people that we think are doing awesome things. And one of the other things, I guess, the different ways that we operate, and because we've only got limited money, we're trying to do things, add more value to what we can offer to the sector beyond the money that we give. And it's also about creating those relationships, is building support around people to have greater impact in the community. So things like if there's an issue before, I don't know, council or something, and we think it really impacts on what we're trying to achieve and the community sector that we work for, then we'll write submissions, present submissions to council or advocate for change and things like. So one of the things we've been involved with is the living wage movement. So we've written submissions on that, and we became a living wage employer, and we've been actively trying to encourage other organisations to come on board with the living wage movement, because we see people earning decent wages as being really fundamental to what we're trying to achieve to make change for children and young people in the community. So those types of things. And we also try really hard to connect the organisations we support with other funders, groups, that type of thing. And so one of the things, like an example that we've done there, is so we do multi-year funding with Seed Waikato, and Tanya's obviously presenting soon, But we worked with the Ministry of Youth Development. They do partnership funding, and we effectively got the Ministry of Youth Development to match fund what we were funding Feed Waikato. So, and they did that for multi-year as well. So they came in and effectively matched our contribution, which then doubled, I guess, the amount of money that went to Seed, which was super cool. And we've done that for about 3 organisations. And then, yeah, otherwise, if we see something and we think there are other organisations that may want to fund something that we're funding, then we try and connect them in with some of the other funders, because obviously we know lots of the other funders, in particular the family philanthropics, so we have good connections there. And we do a lot face-to-face, which is very hard when you're sitting behind a computer all the time. So I guess screen to screen now instead of face-to-face. But what we were doing when we were able to do it was that we were getting out into the community and meeting groups and seeing what they were actually doing rather than reading an application, because you can have the really amazing application writers and then what you actually see is not amazing, and then vice versa. Someone can be absolutely terrible at writing an application, and then you go in and actually what they're doing is super cool. So it's just kind of moving away from all that written stuff and getting the heart and the feeling and actually seeing something in action. Yeah, so there's lots of words, and obviously there's you know, like everyone says they do certain things, but how it actually works is that, so these are just some examples of things, the way this process has kind of evolved. So for example, a lot of you are probably familiar with the Tuia Charitable Trust, which I know started out of the Mayoral Task Force for Jobs many years ago, but they had a funding contract that was coming to an end, and were kind of in a tricky position where they were then having to going to have to go out again and do all the applications for various organisations. And they're a national organisation, so they work across all the various councils across the country, matching young people with mentors from council. And so when I met with them and heard about what they were doing, and I was like, this is amazing. I know so many other people that would love this. And so I ended up contacting all of these other family philanthropics, and we had a meeting with Tuia, and then we went and met with them and their team on a marae in Auckland. And as a result of that process, they now have 6 years of funding locked in at $250,000 a year. And so, you know, like we kind of are trying to push, like we contributed 25,000 of that, but we managed to like pull our networks, and also to get people to commit for 6 years of funding is kind of quite unheard of sometimes. So that was pretty cool. And then, yeah, I talked about the Ministry of Youth Development thing as well. Oh, this is just a picture. I went to Taumaranui High School last year and sat in the classroom for a day seeing one of the programs that we fund unfold. And there's nothing like being invited into a space and seeing people and working with young people and seeing them open up. And it's just amazing. It's so cool. Sure, as you all know, because you get to work with young people all the time. So what we do is we do our best to find out who's doing what. We review the data and statistics and look for gaps. So we're putting like an equity lens over what we're doing. And as a result of that, we target particular areas. So for us, Taumaranui and Tūrangi have been quite a focus area because they're quite often left out of funding kind of areas, because they're kind of in that weird part of the country where sometimes they're part of Waikato and sometimes they're not. Yeah, they miss out, and plus they have quite a lot of like negative statistics. So that's kind of been a focus area for us. But yeah, we try to, we do have multi-year funding with lots of different organisations across the whole Waikato region. So yeah, we're on the lookout. So we're always looking for new, not new organisations, but things we don't know about, so things that are new to us. We do searches of the charities register because we can only fund registered charities. So we use that as a bit of a database, and then we review all the information we can find, and then we'll contact someone kind of randomly out of the blue and say, hey, can we come and meet you? I once had someone think I was like a Nigerian scammer or something, which was kind of funny. But they're like, people don't usually contact us and say, hey, we've got money, can we come and meet you? So that was funny. But And then what happens is once I've met with someone, I then write like a quasi application on behalf of the organisation. So that contains like a recommendation to my board, and then the board makes the funding decision. So I'm kind of like the middle person. And often I will ask the group, do you want to see what I've written? And sometimes people want to see it and other times they don't. And so that's fine. That's like everyone can be completely involved in the process. It's not like some backhanded, sneaky thing that's going on. And then if we do decide to fund, then in most cases we give untagged, unrestricted grants for operating expenses, and we then leave it to the organisation to decide how is best to spend their funding. So we do it on a very high trust model with few rules. We don't even really do accountability. My auditor does require a receipt, so I have to get a receipt from people, but that's about the extent of what we need. And where possible, we try to allocate multi-year funding so that organisations know exactly how much is coming and for how long. And that kind of ranges from, we did one for 2 years once, and that was because the project was shorter term, but then we're up to 6 years, which we did with Tuia, and I think seed, well, we did seed like a 3-year, and then we extended it for another 3. Yeah, and so in 2021, we entered into 5 new multi-year funding partnerships. So obviously our partnerships are kind of ending at different times, and then we extend them or we enter into new ones. And at the moment, we have 18 of those multi-year funding partners, and those are just some of the organisations. So those are the new ones that came on board in 2021, just to give you an example of some of the things that we're funding. So some of the downsides, like, as you can probably tell, like I'm super passionate about the way that we're doing things. And I tried to think of how this might not work, because with every system, there's never a perfect funding system, right? And someone's always going to miss out. So, so these are some of, I guess, my reflections on some of the downsides that I see with this. And that the first is that the sector is very much, oh, I've lost my presentation.
Sorry, I'm just moving the slides along for you. We haven't been able to see them changing, so.
Oh, sorry.
Popping you guys over to the correct slide here.
Can you
You're all
see
set. Yep, you're on the right slide now. You can continue.
Oh, okay. All I can see now is the home one, so I'll have to change it on my screen once again.
Yeah, I can't see the one that Melissa was just on either.
Has it gone back to the beginning? Oh, and now it's gone altogether.
I'll pop it back off. Yeah, sorry about that. It was not moving past the first slide, I think, for any of us.
Was that just for you, or was that for everyone?
Sorry,
No, it was working.
I was getting it. No, thanks, Melissa. Hey, look, I think
Am I out of time?
Because of our time constraints, I think we probably will leave that there. Look, what I think really has impressed me about your presentation is the change of direction that you've taken and your vision. There's nothing worse than being a bank. I know the feeling with the trust that I work in. It becomes incredibly painful and you wonder what the rewards are. And the other part, which I really, really like, is your funding for multiple years, because the challenges for everybody in this room are those contestable funding models where we're not sure about what's going to happen the next year or the following year, and we can't hold on to employees because the challenges we're facing, because people need security and employment. So it becomes a massive challenge. So you really admire, the 2.5 years that you've been the CE of the trust, that you've actually changed the direction and what you can actually deliver, and the fact that you've been proactive getting out there amongst those agencies that are doing everything in the youth space. Now, Desiree, do you want questions now, or do you want to leave it till the end?
I don't think we have any questions in the chat, so maybe if we want to leave it to the end once we have everyone go through, that'd be wonderful. Cool,
awesome. So is Michelle Parkey turned up, or am I moving on?
Sorry, yes, I'm here.
Oh, Michelle, where were you?
Hi.
Okay, we're going to go. I'm not actually going to do my introduction of you again, apart from I did say you're absolutely wonderful before. You're an inspiration to everybody, but I'll hand it over to you just to keep the things moving. Hey, Melissa, thank you for your presentation before. Back over to you, Michelle Parkey.
Thanks, guys, and apologies for lateness. I'm self-isolating. My daughter tested positive on Tuesday, so Yeah, just been rearranging stuff, but managed to get here, and apologies again. I will share screen. A great presentation too, Melissa. Yeah, as Max said, love the idea of the multi-funding. I've got a couple of groups that you've probably already engaged with. But here we go. Right, let me shoot back to the top. Can everybody see that okay?
Kapai.
Awesome. All right, guys, this is what Desiree asked me to talk to today. But this is what I'm going to actually talk to. So I just rejigged your agenda there a little bit, Desiree. And I wanted to start off talking about what makes a good funding application. So apologies if I'm duplicating stuff that Melissa's already talked about. And just to share as a funder the sorts of things that we look for. So whenever I'm engaging with groups, it's really about what homework have they done. So a lot of the time people ask to meet with me and they don't really know what they're looking for. They're actually just kind of fishing for funds without having a clear concept in place. So the first thing you need to do is have a very clear and succinct project proposal in place. Make sure you cover off the what, why, who, how and when, and be really clear about what project outcomes you're trying to achieve. The next thing we're looking for is the data and evidence. So you might think it's a great idea, but we need some evidence or data to demonstrate that it is a need for the community. And so we do put a bit of emphasis on who the key stakeholders are. So have you socialised your idea with your community? Is there iwi involvement? So these are all the things we look at just off the first bat when we're looking at a proposal. Is there alignment? So is there alignment to central and local government thinking? Looking at the purpose of the different funds and making sure that your project in some way lines up with that. Obviously for Kānoa, we have additional sets of criteria, especially if it's a build project or infrastructure type project. And we even look at things like the resource consents, and have you got some co-funding locked in for the project. So for us in our space, if it's a commercial project, we're looking at least 50% co-funding for those projects. Yeah, we've talked about stakeholders, and yeah, just making sure you're very clearly articulated who benefits from the project. So I see a lot of project budgets where it's very, very heavy on the admin project manager side. So just making sure it's a good balanced budget and that the project, you've clearly articulated who's actually benefiting from the funding. Part two, again, once we've seen that the project kind of aligns and there's a good fit for the funds, then we look at the entity itself. For us in Kānoa, we do quite a bit of due diligence for our bigger projects. And basically we're asking, is there confidence in this entity to deliver on public funds? Have they got a good track record? Are there some risks there in terms of capability? And could we manage those risks? So in some cases we will look at an umbrella entity, or for example with our marae projects we clustered a number of those marae together just to help with the back office stuff. So all of this stuff, you've got your project that aligns, your entity is looking nice and tidy, you've got a strat plan, you've got your audited accounts, then it's looking around for the right funder, and that's where the tricky stuff can happen. As Melissa already alluded to before, you might tick all the boxes, but you're still struggling to access that funding. Approvals can take a long time, so even if you do get a successful approval, it can take, in some cases I've heard 6 months or longer to actually get an agreement signed. So a couple of tips from me, you've got to understand the game that you're in. Never lock and load until you've got a signed contract. I've had a few examples where projects have had the approval, yes, they've gone on and spent some money and some cash, and we're still working through and negotiating a contract and an agreement. So my tip would be, yeah, don't start spending any money until you've got a signed contract in your hands. With this stuff, you need a lot of patience, and find someone that really gets it, someone that gets your project, someone that's going to be that champion for you. And then I've just got a couple of notes here. Well, that's almost just the beginning of it. Once you've got approval, your contract locked and loaded, then you're into implementation and delivery, reporting, risk management, financial management, and monitoring. And so for Kānoa, with a lot of the projects we are administering at the moment, they've got multiple challenges, right? We've got inflation, which is not helping matters, delays with materials and supplies, and of course rising costs of building materials. So for me, anyone that's delivering a project in this current environment is doing very, very well, because there's multiple challenges coming at you from all sides. Okay, funding programs and priorities. So I'm talking about central government funding here. As we all know, it's heavily influenced by the government of the day. With central government funding programs, there's a high turnover, so things are always changing depending on what the government of the day is looking to achieve. In terms of local regional funds, philanthropic funds, they tend to be a little bit more specific, geographical based, and have that strong community lens. For Kānoa, we're really interested in partnering with our other regional funders to look at how we can get a strong pipeline of shovel-ready projects through to Kānoa for the bigger funds. So I'll pick up that kōrero with some of you guys on the call later on. I'm not sure if there's a funding map. You might have covered this already, Melissa, but here are some of the departments that I'm aware of that you could tap into. Obviously, some of them will have a more specific focus. So for, say, MPI, they would look specifically at funding training for rangatahi in the primary industries. But as you're all aware, MSD, TPK, DOC, US, all these departments currently have funds that could have a youth training to employment component to it. For us, we're seeing youth engaged not only in our Te Aramahi and He Paitama Rangatahi projects, but across all of our infrastructure projects as well. So yeah, it's great to see all these rangatahi getting jobs. Spine Road's a good example for us, where we're seeing a lot of Waikato Tainui beneficiaries now working on that project. So just some quick funding tips. Watch budget announcements. They typically happen in May. So departments are now writing up their budget bids, etc. Understand the government policy and thinking of the day. So we're in a Labour government at the moment. Their priorities are around COVID, climate change and child poverty. Maintain relationships with public servants and people that are managing these funds. As I say, things are constantly changing, so it's important that you keep following up with these key people. For us in Kānoa, we're currently leading a regional cross-agency forum where we look at projects collectively and try and give you a whole of government response. So rather than you going to knock on 9 doors, we can just table them at that forum. So happy to talk to anybody that wants to have a chat with us about that process. And yeah, as I mentioned before, I think there's an opportunity for the region to better leverage regional funds to accelerate investment-ready projects to us. Right, just a quick couple of slides on what works, what's working well for us and from what we've seen. So this is a model that it's not rocket science or anything, but this is something that I know works, and I promote it quite strongly, where you've got, and there are 3 distinct areas. You've got your partial care provider. That person is the advocate for the rangatahi and takes a more holistic lens. I'll show you a couple of examples of that shortly. You've got your trainer, the person that's delivering the quality and the technical aspects of the training. And then you've got your employer who has the jobs available and they're quite clear about what skill sets are required. So for the projects that we've invested in, this is the model that has what we've seen work well. In smaller cohorts, we're seeing higher retention rates in those programs. So I'll take you through a couple of slides and examples of this. the Tongariro River Rafting Project. So we funded 2 cohorts of 10 rangatahi through this program. This was an iwi-owned business, Tongariro River Rafting. All of these rangatahi moved on to employment or further training. So they either gained employment with this employer, or they were able to be referred on to other companies to be picked up. What worked well here was that link to iwi. So a lot of these kids were from that area, from that awa, so a lot more meaningful for them. There was pastoral care, and this was a new space for this group. And the auntie that was involved in the project had her work cut out for her, but as a result of her hard work, we saw a lot of these kids succeed. And also those jobs where there was quite a demand for river rafting guides at the time. And so for us, a really successful project. Great to see those kids out there working in the industry. The next project you guys are probably aware of, Oho Mauri, was a 10-day work readiness program. We funded 30 rangatahi to undertake this program. And this was also co-funded by Trust Waikato and MOE. It was an in-school program. We saw it as a way of preventing NEETs, so kind of working with those kids in school that kind of borderline and getting them on a clear pathway. For some of them, Karehuia, sorry guys, my daughter's singing. So that's Oho Mauri, focused in the Huntly North part of the region. Smart Waikato, you'll all be familiar with. They received 476 from us, and they hit about 48 of the 52 secondary schools across the region. So this program was really about numbers, volume, and getting to as many of those kids as they could while in school, and working with local businesses to help facilitate pathways and training to local companies. My last one quickly, Mahi Tika. They received a small drop from us of 140,000, and this program was really supporting those in the disability sector to gain employment, and again co-funded by Trust Waikato. So I guess my key messages are there's some great projects out there. You do have to be quite connected on the ground and understand the communities and the people from those communities. Yeah, my quick tally is that we've chucked in about 2.7 mil over the last couple of years into the space. Have seen some successful stuff, and yeah, I can take questions later on. Thanks,
Awesome.
guys. Opportunity.
Yeah, kia ora, Michelle. Hey, really good. Look, love the work that Kānoa is doing. It's wonderful seeing the success stories out there. Look, and a lot of you that are actually listening in and watching in here, approaching some of the government agencies like MSD seems incredibly daunting and somewhat onerous going through the process at times. But please persevere, because if you're working with the likes of Michelle and anybody in her team, you will get that support, you will get given the direction. And as Michelle said, there's a lot of cross-agency collaboration going on now, which hasn't been happening historically. And I think COVID in some respects has really brought the different agencies together to work side by side, certainly to help our youth that have been displaced or affected by COVID. So, hey, yeah, make that approach. Be prepared to do the hard yards, because at the end of the day, it's worth the journey. So, kia ora, Michelle. Really appreciate the work that you're doing, and I'm sure that you'll be approached by a number of those that are listening in today. And there will be time for questions later on. And Michelle's phone's always going. Hey, Michelle, just hope you and your whānau stay healthy, eh?
Thank you, Max. Thank you, whānau.
Okay, moving on to Seed Waikato story, Tanya Poynton. Now, Tanya I've known for a long time as well. She's an experienced leader and a great history. I think just reading a bit about Tanya, and I've known her personally for a long time, is the fact that she uses her own children as her teachers and her inspiration. And if she's working in the space of youth, then that there's an ideal starting point to lead from. Over to you, Tanya. Are you on mute still, Tanya?
I am. Apologies. It's my computer's saying it's not able to display my content, which is not.
No.
Can you see anything?
We can still hear you.
No. I'm wondering if I could maybe share this with you quickly, Desiree, because it doesn't seem to want to share it.
Yep, no problem. If you want to email it across really quick, we can pop it up for you.
Sure. Thank you.
So while that's being popped up, Tanya, you just want to give a bit of an introduction about yourself and Seed Waikato while Desiree's doing that, if that's possible?
Absolutely. It is on one of my files. It's a real pain.
Okay. Do you want to sing a song?
That'd be awful, wouldn't it?
No, what would be awful is I was singing a song. So does that come through to you, Desiree? Not yet.
I could say something nice about Seed while we're waiting, because it's horrible to have to task switch while you're trying to figure out your presentation. So the YTE workstream was able, with the help of Len Reynolds Trust, to make some funds available to Seed Waikato to get something amazing off the ground last year, which is, you know, a really lovely good news story about putting youth at the centre and allowing them to define and determine what they need. And the result of that was not what we all thought it might be at the start, but that's the beauty of this kind of work. And instead, a group of awesome young people, some on the call here today, decided that the focus needed to be investing in themselves as, you know, youth workers and practitioners in that space. And Te Aka Matua was born, which is such a beautiful piece of work. And I don't want to spoil it, because maybe that's what you're going to talk about, Tanya.
No, go for it. I'm not actually. So.
Oh, okay. Oh, perfect. Anyway, it was just a highlight for us to live the approach that Melissa spoke about, which is just make the funding available, trust that the community will decide how to direct it. And yeah, there's a number of other people on the call who've worked with us in that way, and it's been very, very worthwhile.
Thank you, Michelle. And yeah, hopefully the PowerPoint presentation does come to you shortly. Apologies for that. I haven't been with Seed Waikato for very long. I started in August last year after taking over from the incredible Gemma. What I will start by saying is that Seed Waikato is a organisation that is by young people for young people, and it's a youth-led movement. So it isn't an organisation that has been created from the top down. It has actually come about because young people have been ignited into action. So a really inspirational story about Seed Waikato. And I believe that that is part of the strength of this organisation, and it's led by a strengths-based approach. So perhaps similar to or not similar to other organisations, we're looking at what happens after the needs of our young people have been met from an employment or safety perspective. How will they self-actualize, and how will they become who they want to be and what their dreams are? So just a little bit about Seed Waikato. Desiree, I'm not sure if you've received that yet. It seems to be.
Yes, came through. It's just downloading right now. I should have it up in just a moment.
Fantastic. So I might have talked to the first or second slides here, so we'll keep moving, team. With, I think, the story of our funding, we've got perhaps a different lived experience to others, because we've had the wonderful privilege of our relationship with incredible funders like Len Reynolds Trust, and as Melissa spoke, developing relationships with them has been kind of our secret sauce. When Seed Waikato began in 2017, there really was no funding. We needed seed funding, which we did receive from some organisations that were sponsored us. But what happened with that, if we look back, is really an issue around project-based funding and operational funding. And as you hopefully will be able to see in the presentation, what Seed Waikato received in the beginning was very project-based, and very little was operational-based. And it became increasingly difficult to sustain the organisation, to keep the momentum when there was short-term, quick-fix projects that were being funded versus what is being done in a broader sense for the organisation, so that we could continue to keep our ear to the ground, continue to respond to community, and continue to uphold the dreams of our young people. So I guess I am curious about what happens when more funders become like the Len Reynolds and look at long-term sustained funding that's untagged for organisations to speak to the needs that they see on the ground. It's an interesting and different way of looking at the system, because currently the system is government trusts look at, these are our priorities and you come to us and we'll tell you whether that's a fit or not. What happens if we turn the tables and say, what is it that you need and how can we assist you to reduce administrative tasks and accountability and short-term projects? And how can we look at a more global and sustained way of funding? Because what we have found with Seed Waikato is that when our project income kept on increasing, but our operational and organisational funding increased, then we were able to even better source those projects, source our organisation, and continue forward. So it's a really interesting way of thinking about things, and I'm curious to know if other organisations have had a similar journey. You know, why, for example, do philanthropic trusts or governments want to fund project-based initiatives that might be short-term for a specific project, and then what happens is, as it comes to the end of a project, we're losing momentum because we're unsure of whether that project is going to continue to be funded. Do funders know the impact of a sporadic or scattergun approach? Because it's, even though it's amazing to have a sexy new project, what happens is that if you're not sustaining the organisation, those new projects of themselves are not being thought about and being created, because it actually takes a lot from an organisation to think about a new project, to source it, to resource it, etc. There's, you know, if it's new things, there's a lot of contingency, there's a lot of learning along the way, there's a lot of we say learning because it's failing and learning, but this all is part and parcel of a new project, which is great. But if that's the only thing that's really being funded versus organisational continuity and stability, I'm asking the question, is that the right way of looking at it from a organisational perspective? And if Seed's experience isn't isolated, how can we as a sector come together and explore what those alternatives could be? If you know anything about me, I'm a huge systems change advocate, and I love looking at the conditions of systems change. And one of those is shifting mental models. Actually, it's the hardest one to begin to unpack. But if we do start looking at resource flows, what legislation looks like, etc., and then think about mental models, it's a very interesting conversation for us as those perhaps that are applying for funding could get together to think about the way in which we look at it. And the other question I had was, what if, I know from Seed Waikato's experience, we had to use numerous volunteers to perform our basic administrative tasks around finances, systems, that kind of thing in the beginning, because we were a fledgling organisation and an organisation that was brave enough to do things differently. What if there was another service-based organisation that collectively could support and service other organisations in a part-time capacity? So an organisation where there would be full-time, for example, accountants or administrators, but only a portion of the work for your organisation would be done, on a monthly basis, instead of having to employ an administrator, your bookkeeper, somebody who knows your systems. So is there perhaps a way that we could explore what that could look like in a collective sense around some creativity? So those are the questions I had in my PowerPoint. I also had a graph about where our funding changed and when we could get momentum. And I apologise for that, but we will be sending it to you. There's only 5 slides, so it won't be too tedious to look at. And hopefully it might remind you about what I've quickly overviewed, and hopefully will ignite some conversation around the way in which we look at how things have been done and if they have to be done that way, or can we begin to shift the dial to impact our communities more and to serve them better. Thank you.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Tanya. Really shame for you that your slide presentation wasn't there, but as Desiree said earlier, and as you made reference to, those slides will be shared with everybody following this hui, so everyone will get the chance to have a look through it and make contact with you if they feel the need. Look, you are certainly a systems changer, and knowing for the short period of time that you've been in the organisation, you will be looking to see how you can turn it on its head and make it a far better place. Not criticising where it was before at all, but I think the big point around organisational continuity is a really big one, and I think that there goes through people's minds all the time, that it's how do we start a project that we want to have there for the longevity, and we can't, because we all get incredibly nervous about where that funding model finishes. So look, I made reference to that a couple of times this morning, but it's very, very real. And I think it is about long-term projects that we know can deliver for a sustained period of time in our communities. So again, thanks, Tanya. I'm looking forward to seeing the journey that you go on over the coming months and potentially years. So there will be the opportunity for people to get hold of you and ask you any questions later on. Okay, one more speaker before we take a short break, and this person we're talking to is Owain John. He's the match manager for Philanthropy New Zealand. He's a self-confessed environmental entrepreneur and leader, and he has certainly witnessed the huge amount of barriers that non-profit organisations face when they're looking at funding. So Owain, I'll pass over to you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Max, and thank you everybody for having me today. I also struggle with articulating philanthropy. It's taken me a few months to get my mouth around that one, Max, so you're in good company there. Yeah, pleasure to be on the call. Thanks, Tanya, as well for your chat. I only managed to catch the end of that, but yeah, super interesting partai that you raised in conversation, so thank you. What I'll do is try and share my screen. I also I have a PowerPoint, so Max, you're the only person I can see. Give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Cool. Awesome. So yeah, ko Owen toku ingoa. I'm lucky enough to be the match manager, match te Punatorite manager here at Philanthropy New Zealand. And today I'll give a bit of an overview of what our service that's soon to launch is all about. Cool. So first of all, just wanted to introduce the team. So we're a small team sitting within Philanthropy New Zealand. We've got myself leading that team. I've been on board since late August last year. The project has been up and running for about a year now. In those early stages, it was all about testing the idea, acquiring the funding that we needed to kickstart it. And then this last 6 months has been cool. Now let's put that into action. And I'll talk more about what that looks like in a moment. We've got Sue McCabe, who brings some fantastic experience. She's been the Chief Executive for the past almost 4 years at Philanthropy New Zealand. So she's part of the team. This was really her baby, and her drive has made this happen, which is awesome. We've got Lily McFarlane, who's on board as the Match to Puna Taurite coordinator. So if you are a fund seeker that might end up using our platform, it's quite likely you'll have something to do with her in time. And finally, we've got the wonderful Neil Osteich as well, who's on board primarily to help with the IT delivery, which is a large part of what we're doing, building a new platform for your use. And actually, just before I jump into that, I think it's nice just to add a little bit of a personal kind of story in terms of why I chose to get involved here. Prior to this mahi, I was involved with a small nonprofit called Squawk Squad. We delivered environmental education to schools around the country. And it was something that I had my whole heart behind and was really passionate about. And I was involved for about 4 years. But ultimately we had to close down due to the fact of not being able to find sustainable funding to keep our project alive. So going through that experience and knowing how difficult it was for us to find that sustainable funding and seeing that experience replicated across a number of groups that I was involved with or knew of, I've become really interested in how might we uplift the charitable sector in Aotearoa New Zealand, and how might we enable better funding and more funding for all of those good initiatives. So jumping into a little bit about the what in terms of what Match to Puna Taurite is. So first of all, our vision is for a more equitable, accessible and collaborative funding system. So there's three key points there, and I can touch on each of those. So the first is equity. So primarily what we are referring to here is equity in the distribution of funding. There's a statistic that came out in 2020 through some research that was done, showing that 91% of philanthropic funding went to just 9% of charities. Some of you might have seen that, and it was a JB Ware report. So conversely, on the other end of that means that the remaining 91% of charities, the majority of charities, have to distribute or compete over that remaining 9% of philanthropic funding. So the point being there that most of the money goes to a few organisations. That's not to say that that's wholly a bad thing. There's lots of complex reasons why some charities need more money, notably that they're larger and have larger operations. But it does highlight that imbalance that I think is a lot of people's experience, especially when they're working as a small non-for-profit. So what we hope to do through Match to Puna Taurite is help right that balance and give especially those smaller players a better chance of obtaining funding. The second point there is access. Access to the funding system for a broad range of fund seekers. Again, an issue that's identified in the funding sector is people often don't know where to turn to or where's best to turn to when you're looking for funding. How do you prioritize the number of different options that you might know about, or maybe you don't even know about the different options because there's a lot of different avenues and things to look at. So what we're hoping here is this might streamline some of that or not replace, but contribute to the lesser need to spread your administrative funding search across many avenues, and this might enable you kind of like a bit of a one door. I don't want to overpromise, but can't quite articulate what I'm trying to say here, but basically reduce that admin time that you spend if you're a fund seeker looking for funding. and I'll talk a bit more on how in a moment. The third point there is collaboration. So this specifically relates to funders. So we're looking at how can we bring funders together to work more collaboratively, to talk about some of those, those big issues or opportunities as funders and what they could contribute, and ultimately for the benefit of charities and nonprofits that they're supporting. Next slide. Cool. So a bit more about the details. So again, what is Match? So it's a service designed to facilitate effective connection. So between, you've got funders on one side and fund seekers on the other. It's primarily an online platform that you'll use to articulate your funding need if you're a fund seeker, and as a funder you will use to understand the funding need across the country. And then off the back of that, it's all about enabling that connection, and then beyond that, things are taken off the platform and progressed through conversations and the usual due diligence processes that funders need to go through. So on the left side there, we've got a bit about fund seekers. So what it will look like is you create a profile on the site. You can upload information to that. You can upload funding requests to that if you want, in terms of like specific projects, or just, hey, we need $50,000 for our overheads per year. And we're leaving it quite open in terms of how you articulate that. So you can either get really specific, upload heaps of information, or you can just do the bare minimum, which is self-identify yourself in terms of the area that you're working in, or the beneficiaries that you provide for, or for instance the way that you operate. So we've got a few specific ways of identifying if you're a kaupapa Māori group, if you're Pacifica, and a few other groups that we want to uplift in particular, such as Rainbow community, disabled community, and ethnic communities. So those are some examples of some specific groups that we're hoping to uplift as well. So yeah, so the thing about Matched Puna Taurite that we hope will be of great benefit to fund seekers is that you can upload your funding needs once and have the opportunity to be seen by multiple funders. So we know that there's a lot of admin involved in finding or applying to multiple different grant rounds, which is the current paradigm. This won't replace your need or your the opportunity, or it won't replace needing to or you deciding to choose to apply to multiple different places. But we do hope that this is one place where you can upload your needs once, and again, just have that opportunity to be seen by multiple funders. So we hope that will result in increased funding opportunities. The final point there is about strengthening fund seeker voice in the funding system. So again, we know a lot of fund seekers have some great ideas and want us progress the conversation about how we're funding nonprofits in New Zealand. The likes of what was just mentioned before I jumped on in terms of like longer term funding, for instance. So we'll be looking to help collate that feedback and provide that to funders in a constructive way. On the other side of the service, we've got funders. So they similarly will create a profile that will describe a little bit about themselves, and then they can search to understand what is that funding need across the country as per the profiles that have been uploaded from fund seekers. Imagine like a little bit like Trade Me perhaps, where you can filter for different auction areas. For us, it's going to be, they can filter for opportunities in the Waikato, working in health, that kind of thing. So once they've had that search, once they've completed that search, they might be presented with a list of say 10 fund seekers. They can then click into those and understand a little bit more about, cool, here's some fund seekers I didn't know about that were operating in the area of interest that we have. And great, I can see some of their needs, or okay, they don't have too much about their specific needs, but I'm interested in what they're doing, and their contact details are there. So basically what would happen is that the funder will initiate a connection with the fund seeker, and then you'd take that conversation to progress it offline. The third point there is the increased collaboration opportunities for funders. So similarly to how funders could search for different charities and different funding needs, they'd also be able to search for different funders. And again, we hope that encourages funders to reach out to one another, operate in more collaborative ways to benefit charities. And in a specific example, in that sphere is in terms of enabling better collaboration in response to emergencies. So if there was a natural disaster like the Christchurch earthquakes or White Island, we will look to facilitate connection between funders that want to collaborate and form an aligned response to something like that. Just the last point there is the service will have tiered fees, but free for tier 4 charities. So yeah, I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment in terms of the details, but we're looking to, well, we've got user fees to make sure that we can sustain this on an ongoing basis. The good news is it's free for tier 4 charities, which is the majority of charities in New Zealand, and that's in line with our equity and access goals. A few things on what Matched Pūnatorite isn't. So it's not a guaranteed place to acquire funding. So yeah, so you'll have to be, if you're a fund seeker, you'll have to be the best judge of, is this worth my time? We're making it as easy as we think possible for that. But ultimately it is going to be extra or yeah, some additional administration up front on your end. We hope that would, you know, more than pay itself back in terms of the reduced admin you might have to do if it wasn't available. But ultimately, it's still up to funders as to where they put their money and, you know, what their process looks like beyond the connection. It's not a place for non-registered charities to acquire funding. So for MVP, for launch, we're keeping this to charities, apart from this small pilot that is touched on below. And that's in order to ensure some level of verification to funders as to, you know, who those people are or those organisations are that are looking for funding. As mentioned just below there, yeah, so as one of those target groups that we're hoping to uplift because they experience disadvantaged outcomes of obtaining funding is kaupapa Māori groups, and we're starting on the East Cape with a small pilot there. Provided that goes well, which we hope it will, then we'll look to see if we've got the capacity to expand. But it really comes down to, yeah, the way that we'd hope to verify and our capacity to do so in a way that's amenable to keeping up the what funders expect of the platform. It's not a place where fund seekers will be able to initiate connection to funders. So we don't want to replace existing services that allow fund seekers to connect with funders. Places like Strategic Grants or Generosity New Zealand already provide some of those services. And in addition, we want, or we don't want to overwhelm funders with potential applicants off the platform. So that's why we're enabling it from the funders end. And yeah, finally, it's not a replacement service to other organisations. So there's some great organisations doing amazing mahi in this space supporting fund seekers. And again, we're looking to operate in a niche area that isn't provided for, which is really about that greater visibility of charitable need and then funders to initiate the connection. Still quick time check. Cool. I'll skip through this last piece. So we've got user fees, as mentioned before, so you can have a look there. Free for tier 4. We've also got a 20% discount if you sign up in this upcoming April-May, which is our launch period. We're launching on the 28th of March, which is pretty close now. And also an additional 30% off for PNZ, Philanthropy New Zealand members. Yeah, want to do a big shout out to these amazing funders that have got behind this initiative from the get-go. And, you know, it's really heartening to know that there are a lot of funders out there pushing for positive change. And in our instance, these are the ones that have been championing our cause. So big thank you to Weave in particular as our premier funder. They were formerly the Working Together More Fund, so they're all about collaboration between foundations and that kind of thing. And then we've got some of the other big players in the philanthropic space behind this, which is awesome, like the Todd Foundation, Department of Internal Affairs, and J.R. Mackenzie Trust, as well as those ones listed below as well. Cool. Last slide is, just to kind of wrap up in terms of we're launching in about 3 weeks. So a few ways that you can get involved is sign up to our newsletter. I might be able to send the link through after this. Oh, sorry, that brackets is from a different presentation. Did you say? And yeah, if you're excited by what we're doing or interested, we'd love to help you spread the word around your networks that you may have in terms of other funders or fund seekers that might benefit from what we're doing. So again, either contact us through that email address there, or I might be able to send out some things following the hui.
Awesome. Hey, look, thanks, Owen. Look, I'm sure everybody's looking forward to the 28th of March when you launch. So very exciting. Love the space you're working in. The chat space was really busy while you're talking, and quite a few questions about whether there's government agencies offering funding alongside the philanthropics. And yes, there is, going on what I see on the screen there, which is really positive. It gives you far greater depth than if it's just based on one of your funding entities. I think there's one of the questions here in chat as well, which was talking about the imbalance in funding opportunities across the country, but also across the Waikato, more specifically for us in this room. I think the big thing we've got to understand, and this is why these hui are so important, so we can really get a grip on what everybody is doing in each particular space across the Waikato. And the biggest issue with funding is when we're competing against each other rather than collaborating with each other. So if we can find out what everybody's up to, and we can work beside each other as opposed to against, because there's a mention there about patch protection, and that just comes by default. Of course, you're going to protect your agency that you're working for, but if it's working in the same space as another agency, then that is when we should be having closer conversations about how we can work alongside each other rather than fighting against each other. So I think the strength in this hui is really, really important to get an understanding of that, make the connections that are available. And this is the space where Michelle, Howie, and Desiree and everybody will help you to make those connections. So those that are still in the chat, please consider that we're having these conversations about working for the strength of the Greater Waikato. Hey, it's now, what are we looking at, 11:15. We're running a wee bit behind time, but we probably do need to take a 5-minute bathroom break or water break, whatever it is. So if it's 11:15, can we make sure everybody's back here at 11:20, and then we go to breakout rooms for conversations. So take 5 minutes, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
And we're putting it up on the screen right now. We'll leave these up while you're all out on your break. These are the 3 questions that we'd love for you to kind of guide the conversation in the room. We know that it'll go wherever it goes, which is fabulous. But if you could just jot these down or take a picture of them, they will not be in the rooms when you get magically transported into them in about 5 minutes. Thanks, team.
Thanks, Desiree. Cheers.